Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I am Sonal Shukla. I am the Assistant Director of Programming and Education at the American Writers Museum, and I will be moderating this discussion today. A little housekeeping before we begin. As you're getting settled into Zoom here, this program is a part of our Jean and John Rowe program series, My America, Immigrant and Refugee Writers Today, in conjunction with AWM's exhibit of the same name. You can see the My America exhibit online at my-america.org. If you have any questions while we're talking here today, you can type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Our staff is monitoring that, and we'll send you a chat to ask your question out loud, and we'll also read some of the questions for you. And if you like the kinds of programs that we are doing online, and you've been seeing us for the past several months, you can become a member and get advance notice for special programs and offers, including book clubs, literary trivia, special behind-the-scenes virtual tours, and lots of other good things to keep you busy during this very weird time. Our YouTube channel has videos posted of programs from the past 3 years. You can check that as well for news and updates. Our book selling partner, both when we're open and here online, is Seminary Co-op Bookstore, and you can order online from them or from our bookshop.org page as well. We're so grateful to all of you for being here and for valuing the past, present, and future of American writing. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to be here with Adrianna Cuevas, first-generation Cuban-American author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, a magical middle-grade book. This book explores the life of Nestor Lopez, a Cuban-American boy who must use his secret ability to communicate with animals to save the inhabitants of his town when they are threatened by a tule vieja, a witch that transforms into animals. Welcome, Adrianna.
Thank you.
So as I was reading your book, this is your debut novel.
Yes.
So I would like to begin with asking you how you started out with writing, and who and what encouraged you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. When I was in 4th grade, my teacher was actually a published author, and I just thought that that was the most incredible thing ever. She would read her books to us in class, and just seeing that person, like, I think a lot of times growing up, you think authors are just almost not real. They're just, the books appear. So it was amazing to have her as a teacher. And I think that's really what lit the spark at first for me. I think the tendency to write has always existed in me. My family will attest that I used to write a family newspaper that I would distribute at like Christmas, and would have ridiculous articles. Yeah, I think I was already surprisingly snarky for an elementary schooler. My mother was my 7th and 8th grade science teacher, and she made us read a book over the summer one year, and I made sure to write a scathing review of the book in the family newspaper for that year. And so I think that right there, just seeing how you could make people, like, get a strong reaction out of people based on what you were writing, and you could make them laugh and feel something. And I think I just really attached to that. And I feel like I pretty much live in my own head most of the time. And so I think surrounding myself with my imagination, just writing helps me get it all out. So I think that's kind of what got me going to becoming an author.
Oh, that's nice. That's wow. Newsletter, huh?
Yeah. I think my mom probably still has copies somewhere.
Oh, that is wow. That's really nice. I mean, yeah. So, there are so many genres in writing, and different audiences that you can cater to. Why did you choose to write a middle grade novel? Was that something that you always wanted to write?
I don't think always. I was a teacher for 16 years before I started writing full time. And during my career, at some point in my career, I taught kindergarten through 12th grade. And experiencing all those different ages, I absolutely loved middle school and junior high the best. I just thought those kids, they were so much fun. They are not so mature that they feel like they have to be serious all the time and they're just too cool for you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they are maturing and getting a sense of the world and their place in it and trying to figure things out. And so I just loved how much fun you could have with that age, that you could still be silly, but you could balance the, silliness with seriousness. And I just like the interplay of those two things. And I think middle grade does that really well. You have some middle grade books that deal with some really, really intense topics, but they do it in such an accessible and age appropriate way that I think a lot of other age groups maybe have a little more trouble with. So I love middle grade because I love that age. They're just a lot of fun to not only write for, but to talk about writing with, because they haven't yet learned to censor themselves. So anything goes. And I just think that's great.
And that was like that was the magical element also in the book, that whole thing. So yeah, I think that age really can show you how creative these kids can get.
Very much so.
Yeah. And so talking about, should I pronounce it Nestor or Nestor? Because
Nestor's fine.
How did you come about the story of Nestor Lopez? And when did the idea first come to you about this particular boy?
The idea, I kind of chuckle when people ask me, like, where did you get the idea for this story? Because it was in my very last year of teaching. I was sitting in a faculty meeting and I have a very, very short attention span. And so I was trying to amuse myself. And so I had my notebook open. So maybe I wasn't paying attention. But I decided I just started writing down ideas of if I wanted to write a book for my son, who would have been 10 at the time, what kind of story would he want to hear? And so I just started brainstorming ideas. I'm pretty sure I missed information in the meeting, but that's neither here nor there at this point. And he is absolutely obsessed with zoology. He tells us of the many things he wants to be when he grows up, one of those is a marine biologist. And he loves to sit on our bed with this massive animal encyclopedia that we bought him, and he'll just flip through it. Mom, did you know this? Did you know this? And he'll read me different facts, or he'll read me a fact and I have to guess what animal he's talking about. And I'm really bad at that. But taking that interest of his, that's where the character started. I knew that I wanted to have a boy who had a special connection with animals. And then it morphed from there. And I took the experience of my husband being in the military, and that fed its way into the story as well. And so really, to me, it's a family story because I took my culture, my son's interests, and my husband's experiences, and now we have a book.
No, and my next question to you was based on Nestor's experience, as a military child moving from one city to the other. I know it can be really difficult because I connected with the character on that level, that whole bit of how it feels to be new every single time you go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I was about to ask you, was that based on a personal experience? Like, how did you come about that angle? Because it makes the character
Mm-hmm.
In the book. So can you talk a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. Because you're right. It does. I think the main issue for Nestor in the book is his sense of home and how he really doesn't have one at the beginning of the story. although my husband was in the military, we never did the moving and all of that. But what did happen to us was we were married, I guess 10 months before 9/11. And so we realized that by the time we celebrated our, I guess, 4 or 5 year anniversary, we had spent maybe a year and a half together because he kept getting deployed. And so I took those emotions of us being separated so much, and that's kind of what informs Nestor feeling of his dad being gone. In the moving sense, though, we moved to Texas about 4 years ago. But in that process between housing issues and job changes, I realized that by the time we actually landed where we are right now, my son had lived in 5 different houses in the span of like maybe 5 years. And so I could tell, I at the time didn't think that that had had a big effect on him until we moved here, and he made my husband and I promise, absolutely promise, we had to say it out loud that we were not moving for a while. And so I think I took those feelings of my son, just always feeling uprooted and, you know, having to sleep on a fold out couch because we're staying with, you know, my in-laws and that kind of thing. Just feeling disconnected and like you don't really have anywhere to plant your feet. So I think those two things, even though I haven't had that military experience of moving from base to base, those two things kind of inform how Nestor feels about that.
Yeah, and it shows in the complexity of Nestor's character in the book, you know, that it does, and I think it's very beautifully brought out as well, how children, you know, sort of cope with this whole situation, how difficult it is for them, and I really liked that complexity in that character. It was really, really well brought out.
Thank you.
I noticed one thing as I was reading the book. There are a lot of Spanish verses. I am particularly fond of languages. You know, every time Abuela would say something, and you know, and Nestor would reply, I would try and imagine that conversation happening. I know you've kept most of the, you know, the phrases as authentic as it is, as they were being said aloud. Was there any point, because I know that, you know, that there are times when if you're translating between 2 languages, it often, there are some things that lose essence, you know, and
yeah.
And I think people who write in multiple languages often come about that problem. So was there any point that in the book where this has sort of been an issue where you really couldn't translate it and you just wanted it to be the way it was?
In the book itself, I don't know that I used many untranslatable phrases, only because I love putting Spanish in my books. Absolutely. But my kind of big thing that I'm very adamant about is that I don't actually like translating what is being said. I prefer to imply the meaning through context. So you have to kind of read the passage as a whole in order to understand what the conversation is. In that sense, that let me get away with saying a lot of different things because I knew I didn't have to directly translate it. It was just the sense of it was going to be felt in the passage. So I think like the goodbye phrase that Nestor and Abuela use, you know, where it's a nonsense phrase because it's like, see you later, alligator, you know, but that was okay because you knew based on the scene, they were saying bye. So it didn't really matter what the specific words are. And Spanish does have a lot of untranslatable phrases. I was actually talking to my dad and asking him about some, and unfortunately the first one that popped into both of our minds was a curse word. And I was like, I don't think I should use that one as an example. But, but one of the ones we always say to each other, because the great thing about Spanish is it's like English. It depends on where you are from and how you speak English. And Spanish is the same way because a lot of the phrases that I use, in my opinion, not only make only sense to Cuban Americans, I'd almost say that they really only make sense to those who've left Cuba and those, you know, second generation, those of us who the language has evolved as we all left. So like we always say ponte las pilas to each other, and it literally means put on the batteries, but that sounds weird to say that to somebody, because what you're really telling him is like, get going, get yourself in gear. And then I have a lot of friends, when I announced my book deals or whenever something good happens, they'll tell me, te la comiste, which actually means you ate it, but it's like saying you did an awesome job. So I love phrases like that because I'm a language nerd like you. Oh my goodness, absolutely love it. But to me, yeah, it's also fascinating to see, like, I can say one of those phrases in Spanish and a fellow Spanish speaker could possibly not have any idea what my meaning really is. Like, why are you talking about batteries? Because it's so different depending on where you're from.
Right, right. It basically, it takes the whole fun out of the phrase, you know, like
exactly. Oh, translating, it's the worst.
Yeah, and you're right. You know, whenever I read a sentence, you know, like Abuela and Nestor's, you know, bye bye, was it clearly, you know, you said it in the context. In if you were reading the whole thing, you would exactly know what they were talking about.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, languages are weird. So coming back to the reference of, you know, you being Cuban American, there are often immigrant writers often don't feel represented in literature of their youth. What is the value of seeing yourself reflected in a book at a young age?
Well, I think for kids, regardless of what identity is being expressed in a book, be it a culture, a gender identity, a socioeconomic status, religion, neurodiverse, whatever it is, I think for a kid to be able to see someone that looks like them, sounds like them, is in a similar situation, that's one more thing that makes the story real to them. For me, I love stories that have those characters, but the story itself is not about being that thing. Like, it's not a story about this is what it's like to be Cuban American. It's a fantasy story that has a Cuban American character, and that identity is expressed, but it's not a theme of the book. And I think it's really important for kids to see that, because they can see that, okay, I'm like this character, but I can still have adventures. I can still be the hero. I can save the day, you know, make jokes, fail, whatever. And so I think that it really helps kids to see that anything is possible. So I think it makes a big difference that we do have such a wide variety in Kidlit of identities shown and expressed, because I think it helps kids, one, realize that reading and stories can be for everybody. And then it helps them feel like the story's more real. So I love that it seems like more and more stories like that are coming out, because I'm hoping that will make a lot more kids be into reading and to telling stories.
Right. And I think often what kids look for is relatability, you know,
Absolutely.
In terms of how, and is someone there out there like me? How do I, and it's and so for talking from the perspective of an identity, do you think kids, you know, they connect with characters on levels probably you and I wouldn't, you know, it's really different, but in terms of connecting with a kid like Nestor, who is, you know, who is Cuban American, who has, you know, this family setting is different, you know, he's with his abuela and his mom. Do you think kids, in terms of identifying with a character like that, in terms of identifying with, I know the feeling when I went to a new school, do you think kids would be able to, you know, sort of relate more to this than if probably me, like an adult who's reading that book, if I haven't been through that experience?
I think that's why, you know, it's good to write, as an author, you want to write characters that you feel you can make real by making them fully formed. So you want to make them multidimensional. I think if I had just stopped with Nestor is a military kid and he's Cuban American, it's just what you said. Well, a kid might not be that thrilled with the book if they, one, are not curious about either of those identities or don't relate to them. So I really tried to stuff his character with as many things as I could. And I will admit that I stole a lot from my own son, which is why Nestor collects Pokemon cards and he has boxes full of dart guns. You know, and he's a little bit sarcastic, and then he loves animal trivia. And he, you know, he's obsessed with his abuela's cooking. And so I was trying to give enough personality to him that kids could relate to him in some way. Even if it was just, hey, there's a kid here who collects Pokemon cards just like I do, you know, anything they could latch onto so that they connected to the story and wanted to keep reading. I think it's really important as a writer that you try to create a whole character and not let one identity just be the one that drives them.
Right. Yeah, that is so correct. Was it important that that talking about the whole cooking? I know food is always a part of everyone's heritage that they bring to the table. So was it important that your heritage for you to represent your heritage in this book, and if so, why?
I think, yeah, I mean, it was important in the sense that as a Cuban American writer, that's how I'm going to write. I want to say it wasn't a deliberate choice. If I'm writing what I know, that's what I know, you know. So, but then I realized it's a lot of fun to write that. I had a blast writing the abuela because it made me think of my own abuela and her purple tinged hair because she didn't want to go gray. And, you know, it was my way to honor my family and my history, especially as someone who's first generation, where when my family left Cuba, they couldn't bring anything with them. So the things that we have that are preserving our history are our language, which I shoved in the book, food, recipes, which I shoved in the book, and then the stories that we've told each other, you know. So like when Nestor's sitting down with his abuela and he's complaining about his bad day and she just doesn't understand what it's like to move a lot, and she lays into him and basically tells her story of coming to the US, that's my dad's story, what she says. And so that was kind of my way of honoring him in that. So I think, yes, it's important for me to express my culture, but I don't know that I would know how to write any other way. You know, if my characters aren't eating, they're not existing. So
like I said, for every heritage, I think everyone around us, food can be the talking point for
yes.
all classes. What do you think should be the takeaway from this book?
For me, I like to keep my audience in mind. Like, I know what I want my takeaway to be from fellow writers and teachers, and like, oh, she can write a good book, okay. But from my audience, from students, from kids, I really think more than just a thematic takeaway. For me, books have always been an escape. It's been a way to explore a new world, to learn about a new experience. And so my takeaway is, honestly, it's pretty simple. I want kids to just finish the book and have had a good time and have enjoyed a story, have laughed. And yeah, maybe they've learned a little bit new. They've gotten a sense that home can be whatever you make it. But more than anything, I kind of want it to just be an escape.
That's nice. Was there a specific reason you chose? I know you just said that it was based on your move to Texas. Was Texas as a setting, was it deliberate? Was it something that just occurred to you, or what was the reason behind choosing Texas? as a
It
setting.
was a deliberate choice. And it's just what you said. I had just moved there. And I live in Central Texas, and I absolutely love it. I think it's gorgeous. We have great wildflowers, and it doesn't look anything like where I grew up in Miami. And so that difference struck me. And so I felt like I was exploring a new place, just like Nestor's exploring a new place. So to me, Texas was a natural choice because I felt like my character and I were both learning about our environment at the same time.
And there was a point in the book where I found it very interesting that Nestor refused to write emails, and like it's something that is so common, At our museum, we have typewriters, and I see the excitement in children whenever they come. They're like, "Oh my God!" But instead of focusing on writing an email to his, dad that would reach him sooner, he chooses to write letters. It's sort of a skill that seems a little bit forgotten.
Yep.
Was this particular aspect a deliberate choice to bring Nestor's character more?
It was twofold, I guess, deliberate. From a writer's standpoint, because Nestor loves to draw, because he's an artist, he always has pencil and paper with him. He always has his notebook and something to write with. So it's very easy for him it was easy for me as a writer to incorporate that into a scene where he could just flip open his notebook and jot down a message to his dad. From a more realistic standpoint, I talked to my husband, and he said, when he was overseas, you were never sure what kind of technology access you were going to have. And then he preferred letters because if it was an email, once he clicked off the computer, that was it. He couldn't read it. And if he was out in the field, but if he had a letter from me, he could put it in his pocket and read it anytime he wanted to. And I really liked that idea with Nestor, that his dad would be carrying around the letters that Nestor has sent him so that he could read them anytime he wanted. I liked that connection between them. And so that's why they write so much.
Well, I think the connection between Nestor and his dad is very it's very heartwarming, to connect to connect with the character that way. I think these are all the questions from my end. Would you like to read a passage from your book?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the passage that I picked, it's chapter 6, and just a little bit of context. Nestor has seen his abuela go stomping off into the woods holding a kitchen knife, which I think we can all agree is an odd sight for anyone to see their grandmother doing. But he hasn't had the guts to ask her what's going on. He knows something weird is happening in the woods. There's animals that are disappearing. There's a little bit of talk in town of, does his grandmother have anything to do with this? And he's also still trying to keep it secret from his friend Talib that he has this ability to talk to animals. So in this scene, he and Talib are going out into the woods, and those two issues kind of come up all of a sudden. So this is from chapter 6. Don't go in the dark, musty basement with creaking stairs and flickering lights. Don't answer the phone when you're home alone and the caller ID says axe murderer. Don't enter the decaying abandoned building covered in suffocating vines and bloody handprints. I've seen enough horror movies to know what you are and aren't supposed to do if you want to survive. Don't walk through the woods in your town when you've seen your abuela stomp off into the trees with a knife. I guess Talib and I aren't that smart. After hearing Brandon brag about shooting a deer with his dad, I wanted to check on Chela, the doe I met yesterday, even though Miss Humala told us to stay out of the woods. When Talib saw me take off into the trees after school, he tagged along, saying I shouldn't go alone. As we tromped down the path, I noticed Talib's dark eyes dart around every live oak tree and scan every rocky hill, searching for some unknown threat ready to devour us whole. Talib picks up an acorn and launches it at a tree trunk. He misses by a foot. The acorn bounces down the trail ahead of us, scaring lizards and squirrels who scamper under fallen leaves and branches. So is your dad really strict about keeping your room neat and making your bed since he's in the military? I laugh. I have a Cuban mom and a Cuban grandma. The military is nothing compared with them when it comes to keeping a house clean. I can hear the sound of mom's clicking tongue as she juts out her chin, pointing to the dirty clothes on my floor or my unmade bed. Nothing makes me clean faster than her raised eyebrow, and now she has abuela as reinforcement when she's not home. Talib shakes his head. Sounds like my mom. I watch Talib's darting eyes. I ask, are you looking for something out here? Seems like you are. Talib stops in his tracks. I was hoping to find my dog, George. Your dog's name is George? Yeah, he disappeared last week. I've been looking for him. Talib's eyes dart to a cedar tree with 3 long, jagged marks on it. His eyes grow wide and he draws in a sharp breath. They look like scratches from a claw. You think your dog might be running around the woods? Talib scuffs his foot in the dirt. Well, no, not anymore, I don't think. This isn't making much sense, but Talib doesn't seem to want to say any more about George's mysterious disappearance. I continue down the trail and my stomach growls in protest. Let's keep going, man. I'm hungry, I tell Talib. He follows me, but only after glancing at the claw-marked tree trunk one last time. We pass the spot where I sketched Chela yesterday, though she's nowhere to be found. I stop and scan the hills around us, noticing a glint under a mesquite bush. I hurry over and see the blade of a large kitchen knife plunged into the root of the bush. Small bits of thin white paper surround the knife. I look closer and realize it's not paper, it's snake skin. Kicking the dirt over the shed skin, I stand in front of the knife as Talib approaches. I thought we were going to keep going, he says, his voice shaky. He pushes on my arm to urge me forward. What are you so scared of? I'm sorry your dog is gone, but what's the deal? Between the knife, the claw mark, and the snakeskin, I'm beginning to suspect there's plenty to be scared of in these woods. But I don't want Talib to think my abuela has anything to do with it. Talib wipes his nose with the back of his hand. I went looking for George out here a couple of nights ago, and I saw something. What did you see? Talib stands there and stares at me, his mouth mutely opening and closing, trying to find the words. Well, I found George's collar by a big cactus, and then when I went to pick it up, I heard growling. I thought maybe it was him, even though George doesn't really growl like that. I saw this big, furry brown thing with huge teeth and claws. It was absolutely, most definitely not a dog. Talib's eyebrows raise. But then it changed. I shake my head, unsure I heard Talib correctly. It what? Before he can explain, I hear a shout and a cry. Talib opens his mouth to speak, but I'm not paying attention anymore. The cries grow louder, echoing over the hills. Help, help! I look at Talib. Do you hear that? What, the howling? No, somebody calling for help. Talib scrunches his eyebrows at me, but I take off running toward the sound. Help, please help! The cries pierce my ears. Talib follows me, breathing hard. We crest the top of a hill and spot a figure below us writhing in the dirt next to a large century cactus. It's a coyote. The small reddish animal tries to stand, but his back leg is caught in a clamp of interlocked large metal teeth. With each strain against the round clamp, the coyote yelps and stumbles on the ground. What is that? Talib asks. I shake my head. It's a hunting trap. It must have snapped around that coyote's leg the second he stepped on it. Talib winces. That doesn't seem right. It's not. Hunters use them to trap animals, sometimes predators they want off their land, sometimes animals they're hunting for fur. Dad says they're cruel. An animal can stay trapped for days in it and starve to death. Please help me, please, the coyote cries, saliva frothing at the corners of his mouth. I run over and kneel down next to the injured animal. The coyote bares his teeth and growls, not knowing if I'm friend or foe. I raise my hands. It's okay, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to help you. You can understand me? The coyote asks. Yes, I can, I tell him. Yes, you can what? Talib asks behind me. Nothing, I say, shaking my head. One problem at a time. What are you going to do, Nestor? Talib asks, coming closer and kneeling down next to me. We need to release the trap from around his leg. Talib examines the trap. It's a half circle of sharp metal teeth folded together. This is one of Brandon's, I'm sure of it. He and his dad aren't exactly known for their legal hunting methods. I clench my hands into fists. This Brandon kid is steadily rising on my list of people I'd like to see rocketed to the surface of Mars without a spacesuit. I keep my hands on the coyote, rubbing his fur and reassuring him that he'll be okay. His body is warm and rises up and down as he pants. Talib presses 2 round tabs on either end of the trap and it snaps open with a click. It's okay, buddy, you're free, I tell the coyote as he lets out a soft yelp. He tries to stand on his back leg, but his small body falls into the dirt. I can't walk, it hurts too much. Okay, let me help, let me carry you, will that be all right? Behind me, I hear Talib clear his throat. Nestor, are you talking to that coyote? I ignore his question. I'm not sure how I would answer it anyway. I'm not ready yet. Talib seems like a good guy, but I don't want to send him screaming by revealing my secret. Picking up the coyote in my arms, I'm careful not to put pressure on his back leg. Talib and I continue down the trail with the injured animal. I can't believe he's letting you carry him, Talib says. Oh, I must have a way with animals, I tell him. The coyote shudders in my arms. Somebody's not telling the truth, he says. Shush, I whisper, scratching behind his ear with my finger. Talib and I pass a thick patch of mesquite trees when I hear stomping along the trail behind us. We turn and see Brandon, his face red and his fists clenched. That coyote's mine, you thieves, he snarls, kicking dirt at us with his untied shoe. Traps are illegal in these woods, you moron, I snap back. I haven't lived in New Haven long, but Dad always makes sure I know the rules wherever we go. Brandon rushes towards me, eyes on fire. His feet skid in the dirt inches from us. He leans forward, his nose almost touching mine. His hot breath blows in my face. I smell traces of the rubbery chicken fingers served in the cafeteria today. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Talib bend down and pick up a rock. That animal should have stayed in the trap, Brandon hisses, poking me in the chest with his finger. The coyote in my arm raises his head and clamps his small, sharp teeth around Brandon's finger. Brandon screams and draws his bloody index finger back, wrapping his other hand around it. He huffs and stomps away from us, shouting over his shoulder, "This isn't over." I look at Talib, whose fingers are still clenched tight around the rock. His chest heaves up and down. What were you planning to do with that? Talib looks down at his hand. I don't know, maybe juggle to distract him? I chuckle. Come on, let's go. We head toward our houses and the coyote snuggles in close to my body. The sun starts to dip below the tree line, sending snaking shadows across our path. Talib walks behind me, flinging his rock into the mesquite bushes. Nestor, what exactly are you planning to do with that coyote? I think for a moment, considering my options. Do you think my abuela would be okay with a new pet? I ask. Talib laughs and slaps my back. Oh, sure, buddy. I'll bring flowers to your funeral. You like roses or tulips? He takes off towards his house, just a block away from mine, and I keep going until I see the blue paint of abuela's house. As I walk closer, the coyote raises his head and mumbles, "Don't let her get me." I look down at his trembling body. Don't you mean him? The coyote presses into my chest and I feel his pounding heartbeat. No, her. Don't let the witch get me. Ta-da.
Really, really nice. I would like to remind everyone now, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A section. We will read these questions out loud if you would like, or if you want to ask them, you can raise your hands. So we actually have a question from Sonia. She asks, what sparks your creativity as a writer?
For me, I think I read a lot. And so I think devouring other stories always gets my brain churning. And I think a lot of times for writers, they're always concerned like, oh, but aren't you afraid of those ideas from those books, you know, seeping into your story? And I've found that for some reason, that's really not what happens. It's like the productive part of my brain, or at least the editor part of my brain, turns off while I'm reading, so I'm more open to ideas. Because a lot of times I'll be reading and an idea will pop into my head for a manuscript I'm working on currently that has nothing to do with the book that I'm reading. So for me, just keeping stories always in front of me really helps. I also, I bake a lot, and there's a special reason for this as a writer that I've shared before. But for me, one of the most important parts of any creative endeavor, but I think also especially writing, is that you have to be able to fail. You have to let yourself write something absolutely horrible and irredeemable. And that happens to me a lot in baking. When I like to attempt new recipes, new techniques, things I've never tried before. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I sometimes have to try again, figure out what went wrong. And I think that translates a lot over into writing, or like I said, any creative endeavor. You have to be willing to start over, to see that you've maybe not done the best job, and try again. Because I think a lot of times when writers talk about having writer's block, for me, it's because you're afraid to fail. You're afraid of making a mistake. It has to be perfect the first time. So I like to bake, and my family may suffer because of it, because sometimes the results are good, sometimes they're not. But for me, it's just a way to practice that whole thing of being okay with being a failure.
Oh boy. All right. So we do have a couple of questions. So this question is from Peter Lopez. What is your favorite non-spoilery scene from Nestor?
Oh, wow. Okay. Non-spoilery. I think I kind of have two, and they're completely different scenes. One is because it's very emotionally real to me. There's a scene in the book where Nestor's mom thinks that these people who have come to the front door are there to tell her that something bad has happened to Nestor's dad. And it turns out they're just high schoolers in their ROTC uniforms selling popcorn. And at first I was afraid when I wrote that my agent or my editor was going to say that's unrealistic. And I was fully prepared to come back and say, that happened to me. When my husband was deployed, the local high school kids from ROTC came to my door. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, looking through the little peephole and seeing two people in uniform. And it scared me to death. And in retrospect, you think, well, why would you possibly think that? It doesn't make any sense. But I think people who are in an emotionally intense situation, we don't always see things as they are. So I don't want to say that I liked writing that scene, but I think it was important to me to write that scene. It kind of helped me emotionally process what it was like to have a spouse that was deployed. And so I guess I'm kind of glad that that is now out there. I think there are a lot of people who will relate to that. But in a more fun sense, different from that scene, I really, really loved writing the climax of the book, because I got to just throw all of my characters together and have them interact. It helped me show how far they had come, kind of in their character arcs and their journey. I love trying to make things as fast-paced as possible. And the climax really let me do that. There's a lot of action. And so it was just, as a writer, it was fun to write. And I like going back over a scene and just still enjoying it. And I've read that scene quite a bit, as you have to, as you go through edits and whatnot. And I still enjoy it every time. And so to me, that's kind of the hallmark of something I've really enjoyed and is satisfying to write.
Our next question is from Casey Decker. What are you working on now?
I got to announce my second book deal a few weeks ago. And I said this before, but I love Nestor. It will always be my debut. It will be my family's story. But I have to be honest and admit that this second book is my heart's book. It's called Cuba in My Pocket, and it is my dad's story. So the immigration story that Abuela tells Nestor in the book, that was my first little dabbling into, do I really want to tell this family history? So it's my dad's experience moving to the US from Cuba in the 1960s. He came by himself. And so it was him living with a missionary family and then with a foster family, not knowing when his family was going to come and join him, if they were going to come and join him. So I really loved being able to sit and talk with my dad, to talk with other family members. It's kind of spurred this movement in our family to study our genealogy. And so it's, I love it because for me as an author, whether I'm writing contemporary fantasy, historical fiction, whatever, my family history is always going to come into play somehow, because I feel like that's my responsibility. And so I'm really excited for everyone to read this book. It's a lot different than Nestor. I really made a shift from contemporary fantasy to a historical fiction. So I loved that, you know, from a craft standpoint, it was really fun to kind of undergo that challenge of shifting from not just a genre, but there's a tone shift too. I might have dialed down the sarcasm in the second book as much as it goes against my personality.
Our next question is from Deborah, and she asks, who is your favorite Latina author?
Oh, wow. That's tough because I tend to crave those authors and just devour anything they write. My favorite ones for middle grade, I absolutely love Celia Perez, First Rule of Punk, Strange Birds. Those are incredible. Margarita Engel and her verse novels are absolutely amazing. I will never write a verse novel. I don't have that in me. So I am just in awe of her ability and how prolific that she is. For middle grade too, I also love Pablo Cartaya and Carlos Hernandez novels. They're just fun. And it really shows me like the connection that you feel when someone from your shared culture is expressing their culture. You are reading and my mind is always going, oh, me too, you know, and so I love the experience of that. For YA, I really, really love Nina Moreno's Don't Date Rosa Santos, is one of my absolute favorite books ever. And then Laura Taylor Name's Library of Lost Things is wonderful. And you've got me talking about book recommendations now, and I could go on forever, so buckle up. But I think when I was trying to let myself accept the idea of being a writer and being an author, it was honestly their books that I felt like gave me the permission that yes, there is a space in Kidlit for our stories and our culture. So I think that's why I'm so adamant about shouting about them.
Well, thank you for those recommendations. Our next question is from Patricia, and I think Patricia would like to ask that question.
Hi, Adriana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for this book talk. I've been looking forward to this all day. So thank you for that. And thank you also for the passion that I hear when you speak about the middle grades and middle school. As a 7th and 8th grade teacher this will be my 23rd year. And
nice.
To a high school teacher, my husband says it takes a special kind of crazy to like middle schoolers.
Yes.
So thank you for being crazy with us. So you actually answered one of the questions that I had for you, or maybe you didn't, I don't know. But as a middle schooler, I wanted to know what kinds of authors did you enjoy reading? I know that when I was a middle schooler, there weren't very many
right.
Latino, and our lives were not represented in many young adult books. And I remember my very first, the book that I read that first I felt some sort of connection was John Steinbeck's The Pearl. And it wasn't even by a Latino or Latina author.
Right.
Remember reading that book over and over and over again just to be able to pronounce the Spanish names. And I was like, oh, wow. And so to see so much Latina young adult literature coming out is just so refreshing and
absolutely.
And I'm trying to, to take it all in. So this is really exciting for me. So that was my first question. Which other authors did you enjoy as a student? And then my second question is, not necessarily young adult, but what was the last book you read?
Oh, okay. So for your first question, I was just like you. It was the same. I I think the first time I really got into a Latinx author was when I was in college and I started reading Isabel Allende a ton. Growing up, I don't recall reading Latinx authors. I was obsessed with short stories and poems by Edgar Allan Poe because I'm a big horror fan and I have been for a long time. So I loved that. And then I was kind of like you, where it was not Latinx authors, because I was a huge fan of Jack London's short stories, because I was a Cuban American girl growing up in Miami, and he was writing, you know, stories in the Yukon, which you would think, well, why would you connect with that? But for me, it showed me that books can transport you to a new place and a new environment. And that's what those books did. And so I was fascinated by snow because I grew up around palm trees and heat. And so I loved his adventure stories. And then, like I said, I loved horror. So I really liked Edgar Allan Poe. But I'm like you are. I'm so glad that there's books out now that kids can relate to and connect to while still giving them that escape, like I craved when I was growing up. And then I forgot your second question.
What was the last book you read?
There you go. So the last book I read, I've been, because here in Texas, I'm still self-isolating with my family. The one outing that we do is my local indie bookstore, Book People, has a contactless delivery for books that you can get. So once a week, we go, we pick up all the books that I've ordered, we go grab bubble tea, and then we come home and read. So I really, really loved, and I think I actually have it back here. I gotta find the right one. Here we go. Oh, I can't find it. Here we go. So this is another Cuban American author, Natalia Sylvester. This is a YA, it's called Running, but it's about a girl whose dad runs for president, but the platform that he's running on is something that she doesn't agree with. And so she has to decide if she's going to speak out or if she's going to kind of maintain the family peace. But it's a really good book. I think it came out about 2 weeks ago. But I loved reading it, and Natalia writes it really well because I think it fits a lot of those universal YA themes of like finding your voice and figuring out your place in the world, and being brave. And so I highly, highly recommend Running.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions, Patricia. Our next question is from Nina Sanchez. There is a growing number of Spanish immersion and dual language programs across the US. Any thought to producing a fully translated version of the book?
Oh, I would love to say that is in my hands. Unfortunately, it's not. It's the same kind of thing when people ask, oh, are you going to write a sequel to Nestor? For authors, unfortunately, those aren't the decisions that we get to make. I would absolutely love a translated version of Nestor, because I think that just makes your story accessible to even more kids. So yes, in every language, I would love a translation, but we would have to wait and see if that's something that comes about.
So I think this would be our last question, is again from Sonia Adams. Can you recommend children's literature titles that represent diverse voices and experiences? And again, she asks, what are you currently reading?
So if you're looking for books by Latinx authors, I strongly recommend a group that I am a part of called Las Musas. We're a collective of female identifying and non-binary Latinx authors of picture books, middle grade, and YA. So if you're looking for kid lit in that regard, so I highly recommend looking at Las Musas. We Need Diverse Books is another excellent resource that focuses on diverse titles. So I highly recommend looking at those two, I guess, groups for book lists. For me, like I said, I read Running. I also am on NetGalley, where you get to read books before they come out. which I love, but then at the same time, I'll read a book I love and I want to scream about it with other people, but nobody's read it yet. So it's really soul crushing because I read Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, and I'm just telling you that October cannot come fast enough because it's it's a Dia de los Muertos book, and it's amazing. It's YA, and I highly recommend it because I will be freaking out about it forever. For middle grade, in that same vein, Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega is excellent. It takes place in Florida, so as an ex-Floridian, I really enjoyed that one, but it has a lot of the same themes of family, and there's a really strong abuela in it. But I would, yeah, Cemetery Boys and Ghost Squad are two that I would strongly recommend that I read recently.
That's, yeah. Could you just repeat the groups that you mentioned?
Oh, sure. So Las Musas, yeah, that's it. And then just the We Need Diverse Books organization.
Okay. Well, I think these are all the questions from the audience and from our side. Thank you so much, Adrianna, for coming in today and talking.
Thank you.
It's wonderful talking to you.
It was very nice talking to you as well. I appreciate the invite.
Of course. And everyone, please read the book. It is amazing. It is a beautifully written book. And thank you, Adrianna. I hope, you have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you very much.